Hello, my name is Hannah DeVito, and my presentation is entitled Diasporic Communication in Yuri Herrera's Signs Preceding the End of the World.
While reading Herrera's Signs Preceding the End of the World, I was reminded of Junot Diaz's novel The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde. Both novels follow their protagonist's transculturation during mythically inspired journeys. Oscar combats a Fuku curse, and Makina undergoes the journey to Mictlan, the Aztec underworld. According to Ryan Long, the novel embodies Mictlan and portrays various languages to emphasize, quote, the unsettling power of intermediate spaces formed by several junctures, such as the world and the underworld, outside and inside, words and feelings, and consciousness and dreams, end quote. Lisa Dillman's efforts to translate the book broadens the metaphor for liminal spaces within several junctures to include, quote, the limits to mutual understanding, which are actually necessary elements of communication, end quote, from Long. With these culturally specific mythologies as a starting point, I was struck by the similarities between Diaz's use of Spanglish and Herrera's alternation between three languages. First is the Latin language, Spanish. Second is the Anglo language, or the new language from the north, English. And third is the native language, the area's local indigenous language. Ultimately, Herrera's translations between the three languages emphasize the extent to which migrants persistently seek connection through verbal language and other forms of communication, like letters and magazines. In Signs Preceding the End of the World, the multiplicity and hybridity of language and communication highlight the difficulties and possibilities for connection within the migrant diaspora. While the difficulties rely on language and tech barriers, the possibilities emerge in the form of infrastructure and hybrid languages.
According to Makina's rules for the switchboard, quote, you don't decide which messages to deliver and which to let rot, end quote. Herrera, page 18. But what if you don't understand the message, or it gets lost in translation? According to Odelia Romero, quote, indigenous migrants are at a linguistic disadvantage in courts, schools, hospitals, and the workplace, which often leads to the violation of their rights. When they encounter law enforcement, they are often mistaken as Spanish speakers and are advised of their rights in Spanish, end quote. Because of these linguistic barriers, Makina's ability to speak three languages benefits her community. As the trilingual switchboard operator, she connects members of her community nearby and far away. Makina also protects herself and her peers, to an extent, through linguistic translations. Yet, there are times that even Makina encounters languages she doesn't understand. Despite feeling alienated, Makina is able to overcome boundaries for human connection by repurposing them through translations. For migrants, like Makina in the diaspora, the multiplicity and hybridity of language and communication simultaneously complicates and facilitates community building across the diaspora. Makina faced numerous marginalizing barriers for linguistic connection. These linguistic disconnections were dependent on language barriers. For example, Makina was disconnected from Mr. H when, quote, he shouted something in a tongue Makina didn't speak, end quote. Herrera, page 16. Despite disconnections such as this, Makina is always reaching to create community through language. When Makina was unable to navigate the town and find her brother, quote, she'd approach anybody she heard speaking Latin tongue, end quote. Herrera, page 73. Although she felt hopeless, Makina is determined to navigate by finding familiarity in her surroundings. Makina also praises her Latin Anglo dictionary because although, quote, those things were outdated the second they left press, they still helped. Herrera, page 52. Makina recognizes the disconnection she experiences within the northern diaspora, yet she repurposes these connections by locating familiarity in the foreign environment, whether that's languages she speaks or kitchens filled with other migrants. Despite language barriers, Makina overcomes hurdles to communication and community building in the diaspora. Furthermore, Makina repurposes language to form connections with her fellow migrants in the northern diaspora of the novel. Makina uses translation to help the people around her. For example, while Makina waited at the bus station, quote, she deciphered a letter for a very old man who couldn't read, and she taught a boy to say soap in Anglo, end quote. Herrera, page 35. Makina also protected the busboys from exploitative men who spoke only in, quote, Anglo tongue, end quote. Herrera, page 36. Makina is a translator for her fellow migrants, benefiting them when she chooses. In contrast with Makina's previously altruistic translations, she withholds Cora's letter to Makina's brother. The simple letter proposes Makina's brother come home, however, he is firmly attached to his new home. He has found survival in the, quote, highly contextual performances of liminal identity, end quote, Dahan, page 109, that exists within diasporic communication, specifically letters. The infrastructure allows him to portray his, quote, transnational moment or diaspora identity, end quote, Dahan, page 112, as situated within his letters. The borders for his success, the land he came for, are negotiated to form a liminal existence between his past and his supposedly prosperous future. Within this way, letters both constrain and aid diasporic connection and community, albeit a distorted. To conclude, in Signs Preceding the End of the World, the multiplicity and hybridity of language and communication highlight the difficulties and possibilities for connections in the migrant diaspora. To overcome language barriers, Makina and her fellow migrants translate verbal and written discourse. However, the possibilities for connection emerge in the form of infrastructure and hybrid language. Infrastructure is an important way for migrants to communicate nationally. For example, Makina's benefactors for her journey read, quote, the pages of the morning paper, end quote, Herrera, page 13, and, quote, a national paper open to the politics, end quote, Herrera, page 21. Eliminating tech barriers, like the lack of cell towers, would open up more ways for infrastructure to benefit diasporas. Hybrid languages open up further possibilities for diasporic communication because they incorporate existing tongues into new, unexplored territories for language. According to Makina, hybrid languages and translation create, quote, new things, end quote, Herrera, page 66, not, quote, another way of saying things, end quote, Herrera, page 66. Through the lens of diasporic migration, Herrera's Signs Preceding the End of the World demonstrates the multiplicity and hybridity of language and communication as methods for connection within migrant diasporas. Thank you for watching.